It is somewhere around 11 at night. The fire has burned down to a consistent bed of coals that will hold heat for several more hours without needing significant attention. The group has finished the evening's social activity, the conversation, the story sharing, whatever communal processing of the day's events ancient humans engaged in during the hours between sunset and sleep. One by one, people are settling into their sleeping positions. And here is the question that most people have never thought to ask. What exactly are they settling into? Because the popular image, the one that has been floating around in popular culture's vague sense of ancient life for as long as anyone can remember, is of ancient humans simply lying down on whatever surface happened to be available. The bare ground. Maybe inside a cave if they were lucky. Maybe outside if they weren't. No preparation, no bedding, no particular concern about comfort or temperature regulation or the specific quality of the surface they were about to spend 8 hours in contact with. Just ground. Person on ground, sleep. And I want to spend this entire video taking that assumption apart, because it is wrong in ways that are both interesting and revealing about how we think about ancient humans more broadly. The assumption that ancient humans slept without preparation, without bedding, without deliberate environmental management of their sleep conditions is an assumption rooted in a deeper, more pervasive error. The error of assuming that because ancient humans lacked the specific technologies of modern sleep, the mattress, the pillow, the climate-controlled bedroom, they must have slept in a state of primitive, uncomfortable deprivation. They did not, and the evidence for how they actually slept is both direct and fascinating. Let's start with what the archaeological record actually shows because there is direct physical evidence of ancient sleeping arrangements that most people have never heard of. In 2020, a study published in the journal Science documented the discovery of what researchers described as the world's oldest known bed, found at Border Cave in South Africa. Border Cave is a site with an extraordinary depth of occupation. Ancient humans used it repeatedly across hundreds of thousands of years. And the excavation layers represent a detailed stratigraphic record of ancient life over an enormous time span. The bed found at Border Cave dates to approximately 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years. That is not a recent development or a late sophistication in human behavioral history. That is ancient humans making deliberate sleeping surfaces at essentially the same time that anatomically modern Homo sapiens were first appearing in the fossil record. What did this 200,000-year-old bed consist of? Layers of grass from the sedge family, specifically cyperus grass, arranged in a deliberate sleeping platform. The grass had been collected, brought to the site, and arranged in a way that created an elevated, insulating surface separate from the bare cave floor. The researchers found evidence that the grass layers had been periodically replaced and renewed, consistent with ongoing maintenance of the sleeping surface rather than single-use construction. They also found evidence of ash layers beneath the grass, suggesting that ash had been deliberately spread on the cave floor under the bedding, almost certainly as an insecticide, since ash kills and repels a range of parasitic insects including fleas, ticks, and beetles. This is not primitive improvisation. This is deliberate environmental engineering of a sleeping space involving the collection and transport of specific plant materials, the application of a secondary pest control treatment to the substrate, and the ongoing maintenance of the sleeping surface over time. It required planning, knowledge of which plant materials were suitable for bedding and why, and behavioral commitment to sleep quality as something worth investing effort in. And this is the oldest confirmed bed. Not the first bed, the oldest one that has survived the conditions required for preservation across 200,000 years of geological time and has been identified by archaeologists who were looking for it. The actual beginning of deliberate bedding construction by ancient humans is almost certainly significantly older than this find. Let's talk about why sleep quality was not a luxury consideration. For ancient humans, it was survival critical. Sleep deprivation impairs every cognitive and physical system that ancient survival depended on. Attention and reaction time degrade with insufficient or poor quality sleep faster than almost any other cognitive function. Decision-making, the ability to assess risk accurately, to plan effectively, to evaluate options without the cognitive biases that sleep deprivation amplifies, is significantly compromised by inadequate sleep. Fine motor control, which was essential for the tool-making and food processing that ancient life required, degrades with sleep deprivation. Immune function is substantially suppressed by inadequate sleep, making individuals more vulnerable to the infections that were a leading cause of ancient mortality. An ancient community with chronically poor sleep quality was a community with reduced cognitive performance across the board. Slower reaction times in predator encounters, worse decision-making in resource management, reduced technical skill in tool production, higher disease susceptibility. The fitness costs of poor sleep were real, significant, and directly relevant to survival and reproductive success. This creates a straightforward evolutionary argument. Ancient humans who invested in sleep quality, who constructed sleeping surfaces that improved their sleep outcomes, were healthier, more cognitively functional, and more reproductively successful than those who didn't. Over generations, the behavioral tendency to construct bedding would have been selected for and maintained in ancient populations. The border cave evidence confirms that this selection happened, that ancient humans were investing in sleep environment management at least 200,000 years ago, but the evolutionary logic suggests the behavior is older still. Let's talk about what sleeping on bare ground actually means physically, because this is where the impracticality of the bare ground hypothesis becomes most obvious. Ground is cold, not just in winter. In most environments that ancient humans inhabited, sleeping directly on the ground produces significant heat loss through conduction even in relatively warm ambient temperatures. The ground has a large thermal mass that draws heat out of any object in contact with it. A human body in contact with bare earth loses heat substantially faster than a human body suspended above the earth or separated from it by an insulating layer. In cool environments, this heat loss can prevent adequate sleep temperature regulation and cause the kind of chronic cold stress that impairs both sleep quality and immune function. Ground is also hard. The human body has specific pressure points, hips, shoulders, knees, that are particularly sensitive to sustained pressure during sleep. These are exactly the areas that become uncomfortable and eventually painful during extended contact with hard surfaces, interrupting sleep and preventing the kind of deep, sustained sleep stages that are most important for physical restoration and cognitive consolidation. The body's natural response to this discomfort is increased movement and position changes, which interrupt sleep continuity and reduce overall sleep quality. Ground in most natural environments is also populated by insects, arachnids, and other small organisms that find sleeping humans attractive sources of nutrition or warmth. Fleas, ticks, mites, mosquitoes, ants. The arthropod life of a natural soil surface is not inconsequential, and direct contact with that surface during the extended vulnerability of sleep creates significant exposure to biting insects and parasites. This is not a trivial concern. Ectoparasites were a significant source of disease transmission in the ancient world, as the health consequences of high parasite loads are cumulative and can be seriously debilitating over time. The ancient humans who applied ash to the floor of their sleeping spaces before laying down grass bedding at Border Cave were dealing with exactly this problem. The ash created an inhospitable environment for insects before the insulating plant layer was placed on top. This is pest management as sleep technology, deliberately engineering the sleeping environment to reduce the parasite exposure that direct ground contact would produce. Let's talk about the specific materials that ancient humans used for bedding, because the Border Cave evidence opens a window into a much broader picture of ancient sleeping technology. Grass and sedge are the most archaeologically documented bedding materials, partly because of their preservation properties, and partly because they are among the most universally available plant materials in the environments that ancient humans inhabited. But grass and sedge were not the only materials used. Leaves of broad-leafed plants were almost certainly used where available. They are soft, insulating, and available in large quantities across much of the ancient world. The large leaves of specific plant species have been used as sleeping surfaces in traditional cultures studied ethnographically, and their use in ancient contexts is a reasonable inference from both their availability and their functional properties. Animal hides are perhaps the most significant bedding material that the archaeological record cannot directly document at the oldest sites, because hide preservation over hundreds of thousands of years is essentially impossible under most conditions. But the evidence for hide processing going back hundreds of thousands of years, the hide scraping tools, the bone awls, the evidence of deliberate hide treatment at ancient sites tells us that ancient humans were working with hides extensively. A processed hide is not just clothing material, it is also an excellent insulating sleeping surface. Flexible, warm, moisture resistant, and significantly more comfortable than bare ground. The combination of a grass or leaf layer as a base, for elevation and insulation from the ground, with processed hide as a top covering represents the functional equivalent of a mattress and blanket combination. Ancient humans with access to the materials and the knowledge to produce this combination were sleeping on something significantly more sophisticated than bare ground. Bark, in cultures living in forested environments, was used as both a structural material and a sleeping surface in traditional societies studied ethnographically. Birch bark, specifically, has antimicrobial properties that would have made it additionally valuable as a sleeping surface material in terms of reducing microbial exposure during sleep. Pine needles, soft, aromatic, and available in large quantities in coniferous forests, have been used as bedding material in multiple traditional cultures, including for their insect-repelling properties, which some coniferous oils provide. Let's talk about sleeping positions and social arrangements, because sleep was not a solitary activity in ancient human communities, and the social architecture of ancient sleeping deserves examination. Ancient human groups slept together, not in the privacy-respecting, individually separated sleeping arrangements that modern people in most cultures maintain, but in genuinely communal sleeping configurations where multiple individuals shared a common sleeping space in close physical proximity. This was not a lack of privacy culture, it was a thermal and social strategy with multiple simultaneous benefits. Shared body heat is a significant factor in cold environment survival. Multiple bodies in close proximity create a microclimate within the sleeping group that is substantially warmer than the ambient environment. The thermal contribution of multiple warm bodies in an enclosed or semi-enclosed sleeping space can mean the difference between adequate thermal regulation and dangerous heat loss during a cold night. The communal sleeping arrangement was not just socially bonding. It was physiologically warming in a world without central heating. The specific arrangement of individuals within a communal sleeping group was almost certainly not random. Parents slept in close contact with young children and infants, both for the thermal benefit and for the monitoring and caregiving that infants require through the night. Extended family relationships were reflected in sleeping proximity, consistent with the same relationship structures that organized waking social life. The most physically vulnerable community members, the very young, the elderly, the injured, were likely positioned within the sleeping group in ways that provided maximum protection. The communal sleeping space was also the site of the lightest sleep in the group's rest pattern. Not everyone slept at the same depth simultaneously. The anthropologist David Sampson's research on sleep in contemporary Hadza hunter-gatherers found that within a sleeping group, the distribution of sleep stages across different individuals at any given time meant that someone in the group was almost always in a lighter sleep stage, more alert, more responsive to environmental changes than everyone else. This distributed vigilance is not planned or assigned. It emerges naturally from individual variation in sleep patterns within a group. And it means that the communal sleeping arrangement provides a passive, continuous level of environmental monitoring even during the sleeping period. The fire was the center of the sleeping arrangement, not just for warmth, though the thermal contribution of a sustained fire through the night was significant, but for light, for the predator deterrent effect of visible flame, and for the psychological security that its presence provided. Ancient sleeping communities were not unconscious in darkness. They were surrounded by firelight, in groups, with the continuous ambient monitoring that group sleep provides. Now let's address something specific about ancient sleep patterns, because the research on this question has produced findings that challenge deeply held assumptions about what normal human sleep looks like. The assumption in most modern cultures is that the healthy, natural human sleep pattern consists of a single, consolidated sleep block of approximately 7 to 9 hours per night. This assumption is so embedded in modern health discourse that deviations from it, waking during the night, difficulty maintaining consolidated sleep, preference for shorter nighttime sleep combined with daytime napping, are typically classified as sleep disorders or signs of inadequate sleep hygiene. But anthropological research on sleep patterns in traditional hunter-gatherer communities suggests that this single consolidated sleep block may not represent the ancestral human sleep pattern at all. Jerome Siegel's research team, studying sleep in the Hadza of Tanzania, the San Bushmen of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia, found that sleep in these traditional communities typically consists of a nighttime period of approximately 6 to 7 hours combined with brief daytime napping, with significant individual variation in both timing and architecture. Night waking, brief periods of consciousness during the night, was common and unremarkable. Historian Roger E. Kirch's research on historical sleep patterns documented evidence for a two-phase sleep pattern in pre-industrial European cultures. A first sleep of several hours followed by a period of wakefulness of an hour or two, then a second sleep until morning. This biphasic pattern appears in historical records from across multiple cultures and time periods, and it is consistent with the polyphasic sleep patterns observed in traditional communities. Ancient humans almost certainly had sleep patterns that were more variable, more responsive to seasonal light cycles, and less rigidly consolidated than the single nightly block that modern culture treats as normative. Winter nights at high latitudes are very long, summer nights are very short. A sleep pattern that responded flexibly to these seasonal variations, sleeping longer in winter and shorter in summer, incorporating daytime napping during the long summer days, was more adaptive than a rigid single-block pattern that ignored seasonal light variation. Let's talk about the relationship between sleep environment and sleep quality in the context of ancient life, because this is where the question of ancient bedding and sleeping surfaces connects to broader questions about ancient well-being. The evidence from traditional communities and from historical records consistently shows that people sleeping in environments that are appropriate for sleep, comfortable sleeping surfaces, adequate thermal regulation, darkness or low light, protection from environmental disturbances, sleep better in measurable ways. Sleep duration, sleep continuity, the distribution of sleep stages, and subjective sleep quality are all improved by appropriate environmental conditions. Ancient humans who constructed sleeping surfaces, who elevated themselves off cold, hard, insect-populated ground with grass bedding, who shared body heat in communal sleeping groups, who maintained fire for warmth and light through the night, were creating sleeping environments that were significantly better than bare-ground sleeping would have produced. Their sleep quality, on measurable dimensions that relate to health and cognitive function, was almost certainly better than the bare-ground hypothesis would suggest. This matters because the health and cognitive consequences of sleep quality compound over a lifetime. An ancient individual who consistently slept on an appropriately constructed sleeping surface in a warm communal sleeping group with fire maintained through the night across decades of adult life was accumulating better health outcomes and better cognitive function than an individual sleeping under worse conditions. The investment in sleeping environment quality was not luxury. It was long-term fitness maintenance. The study of ancient sleep environments is therefore not a trivial archaeological curiosity. It is directly relevant to understanding the health, the cognitive performance, and the quality of life of ancient humans in ways that connect to the broader question of how ancient communities managed the full range of survival challenges they faced. Let's talk about caves specifically, because the assumption that ancient humans primarily slept in caves deserves examination. The cave is the iconic image of ancient human shelter. It is so central to the popular mental image of ancient life that the term caveman has become the generic shorthand for ancient humans, despite being wildly inaccurate as a description of most ancient human habitation patterns. Caves were used by ancient humans. This is well documented and not in dispute. But they were used selectively, when available, and many ancient human groups lived in regions where suitable caves were not available or not conveniently located relative to food resources. The cave as default shelter image dramatically understates the frequency with which ancient humans constructed and used non-cave sleeping and living spaces. More importantly, the cave itself is not a sleep-quality environment without significant modification. Caves are cold. They maintain temperatures close to the mean annual air temperature for their location, which in many inhabited cave environments is significantly below comfortable sleeping temperature. They are damp, humidity in natural cave systems is typically high, and moisture embedding in clothing significantly reduces their thermal effectiveness. They are populated by cave-adapted organisms including various biting insects and arachnids. And in many cases, the same caves that ancient humans found useful for shelter were also attractive to cave bears, cave lions, and hyenas, a fact that added a specific dimension of risk to cave sleeping that required active management. Ancient humans who used caves for shelter transformed those caves into livable sleeping spaces through deliberate modification. Fire maintained at the entrance or within the cave for warmth and predator deterrence, bedding constructed from grass, leaves, and hides to manage the cold and damp, and ongoing management of the parasite population through ash application and other pest control practices. The cave was raw material for sleeping space, not sleeping space itself. Ancient humans made it useful through the same kind of deliberate environmental management that produced the border cave beds. Here is the full picture that emerges when you pull all of this together. Ancient humans did not sleep on bare ground. They slept on deliberately constructed, regularly maintained sleeping surfaces made from the best available materials for the purpose. Grass, leaves, hides, bark, any combination of these that the local environment provided and that their accumulated knowledge identified as suitable. They managed the sleeping environment actively, using ash for pest control, fire for warmth and protection, communal proximity for shared heat and vigilance. They slept in social groups whose composition was organized around the same relationship structures that organized waking social life. They had sleep patterns that were responsive to seasonal variation, included polyphasic elements, and were embedded in the social rhythms of ancient community life. The sleeping life of ancient humans was not primitive deprivation on bare ground. It was a sophisticated, deliberately managed set of behaviors and technologies aimed at optimizing a function, sleep, that was as critical to survival and cognitive performance in the ancient world as in the modern one. The person settling into their sleeping position at the beginning of this video is settling into something real. Grass laid over ash-treated ground, a processed hide pulled over their body, the warmth of bodies on both sides, firelight, the familiar sounds of a sleeping community. A sleep environment that is not luxurious by modern standards, but that is deliberately, thoughtfully, practically constructed to produce the sleep that an ancient human body and brain needed to function at its best. That is not what we assumed it was. It is significantly more considered, more invested, and more interesting. Ancient humans slept well, not by accident, by design.